Hey everyone, Justin from Adventures Away. And today we're talking about a cruise port that is a little different from almost every other stop you're going to make on a Caribbean cruise. Port Canaveral, Florida. When most people hear Port Canaveral, they probably think about starting or ending their cruise here, and there's a good reason for that. Port Canaveral is one of the busiest cruise ports in the world and serves as a home port for major cruise lines, including Royal Caribbean, Carnival, Disney, MSC, Norwegian, Celebrity, and Princess. But Port Canaveral is also showing up as an actual port of call on Caribbean and Bahamas itineraries, particularly cruises coming down the East Coast. That creates a pretty unique situation. Some passengers are getting off the ship because their vacation is over, while other passengers are walking off looking for a shore excursion. So if Port Canaveral is showing up in the middle of your itinerary, what should you actually do while you're here? Today we're going over some of the most popular options, including Kennedy Space Center, the Orlando theme parks, fishing, beach days, wildlife experiences, and a few alternatives that might actually make more sense depending on how long your ship is in port. Before we get into the excursions, there is something you absolutely need to understand about Port Canaveral. This is not Nassau. When you walk off the ship in Nassau, you're basically walking into a developed cruise destination. There are shops, restaurants, bars, transportation, and things to see within walking distance of the cruise area. Port Canaveral isn't really like that. It's a huge working cruise and cargo port, and the terminals are spread out. While there are restaurants and attractions throughout the greater Port Canaveral and Cocoa Beach area, you shouldn't plan on walking off your ship and finding a big cruise village waiting for you. For most of the things we're talking about today, you're going to need some type of transportation. And depending on what you choose, transportation time could become a major part of your day. Let's start with what I think is the most obvious Port Canaveral excursion, and probably the one I would recommend to the largest number of people. Kennedy Space Center. If you've never been here before, this is one of those attractions that is genuinely unique to this port. You can visit theme parks and other places, you can go fishing in plenty of destinations, and obviously there are beaches all over the Caribbean, but there is only one Kennedy Space Center. This is where you can learn about NASA's past, see incredible spacecraft and rockets, experience exhibits centered around the Space Shuttle program, and learn about what's happening with space exploration today. Depending on the excursion and the amount of time you have, this can easily become most of your port day. One of the biggest attractions at Kennedy Space Center is Space Shuttle Atlantis. Even if you're not somebody who considers yourself a huge space fan, seeing Atlantis in person is impressive. You also have the Apollo and Saturn V exhibits, the Rocket Garden, astronaut-related exhibits, and different interactive experiences throughout the complex. This is also a great excursion for families because it manages to be educational without feeling like you're spending your vacation walking around a traditional museum all day. If you're somebody who grew up watching shuttle launches, followed the Apollo program, or you have kids who are fascinated by space, this would probably be my number one choice in Port Canaveral. Another huge option is taking a transfer into Orlando for Walt Disney World. Port Canaveral is often associated with Orlando, even though you're obviously not pulling the cruise ship up next to Cinderella Castle. Disney World is roughly an hour or more from the port depending on traffic and exactly where you're going, and that travel time is extremely important. If your ship is only in Port Canaveral for 7 or 8 hours, I personally would think very carefully before spending a large portion of that day traveling back and forth to Disney. That doesn't mean it can't be done. Depending on your sailing, cruise lines may offer transportation into the Walt Disney World area. And for a long port call, this can be an interesting option, especially if you already have tickets or know exactly what you want to accomplish. But I would not approach this like a normal Disney vacation day. You're probably not going to arrive at park opening and stay until fireworks. You have a cruise ship waiting for you, and that ship has a departure time. Once you account for getting off the ship, boarding transportation, driving to Orlando, getting through security, entering the park, and then doing the entire process in reverse, your actual time inside Disney could be much shorter than you expect. If I were choosing Disney during a Port Canaveral stop, I would have a very specific plan. Maybe you want to visit Epcot, ride a couple of attractions, eat somewhere you've been wanting to try, and head back. Or maybe Disney Springs makes more sense because you don't need a theme park ticket, and you can shop, eat, and get a little bit of that Disney atmosphere without trying to conquer an entire park in a few hours. Either way, pay very close attention to the return transportation time. And the same warning applies to our next excursion, Universal Orlando. Universal is another popular option for cruise passengers who want to turn their Port Canaveral stop into a theme park day. Depending on what is offered through your cruise line, you may find transportation that takes you into the Universal Orlando area. For families with older kids, teenagers, Harry Potter fans, or people who simply prefer Universal over Disney, this might sound like the perfect excursion. But again, distance is the problem. Orlando traffic can be unpredictable, and you have to remember that getting to Universal is only half the trip. You still have to get back to Port Canaveral. This is one of those situations where booking transportation through the cruise line can provide some additional peace of mind compared with trying to completely organize everything yourself. Always understand the terms of your particular excursion, but if I'm traveling that far away from the ship during a port call, I personally want as few moving parts as possible. If your itinerary gives you a long day in Port Canaveral, Universal can be a lot of fun. If you only have a shorter stop, I'd save Universal for a dedicated Orlando vacation. Now let's completely change gears and talk about deep-sea fishing. This is an excursion that makes a lot of sense in Port Canaveral because you're already sitting right on Florida's Atlantic coast. There are charter boats operating around the Space Coast that can take visitors offshore for several different types of fishing depending on the season and conditions. You may have opportunities to target species such as mahi-mahi, king mackerel, cobia, snapper, grouper, and other offshore fish. For somebody who loves fishing, this might actually be more appealing than spending hours riding a bus toward Orlando. You're getting an experience that fits naturally with the location, and you can find half-day options that work better with a cruise schedule. The big thing I would watch here is timing. If you book independently, make absolutely sure the charter company knows you're a cruise passenger and knows exactly when you need to be back. Weather can also affect offshore fishing, so this is one excursion where plans can change depending on sea conditions. But for anglers, families who fish together, or anybody who wants something completely different from the theme parks, deep-sea fishing is definitely worth considering. Next up is probably the easiest option for somebody who just wants a relaxing day, Cocoa Beach. And if you've been researching Port Canaveral excursions, you may see different beach transfers or beach and shopping combinations offered. Cocoa Beach is one of the closest major beach destinations to the cruise terminals, which makes it much more practical than heading all the way into Orlando. You can spend some time on the sand, walk around the Cocoa Beach Pier area, grab something to eat, or visit the famous Ron Jon surf shop. The nice thing about Cocoa Beach is that it doesn't require you to turn your port day into a race against the clock. You're staying relatively close to the ship, so you can enjoy a few hours at the beach and still leave yourself a comfortable amount of time to get back. This is especially good for families, people who have already visited Kennedy Space Center, or passengers who simply don't want a complicated excursion. Another option that can work well for people who don't want to spend their entire day traveling is exploring the Port Canaveral and Cocoa Beach area itself. Now, like I said earlier, this isn't a port where you're going to walk directly off the ship into a huge shopping district, so you're still going to want transportation. But once you get outside of the immediate cruise terminal area, there are restaurants, waterfront areas, surf shops, and other places to explore. Depending on what's available during your visit, you may also find sightseeing options around the port and surrounding waterways. The advantage here is flexibility. You're not committing yourself to an 8-hour excursion, and you're staying much closer to the cruise ship. Another excursion I think deserves a spot on this list is an airboat and wildlife tour. This gives you something completely different from the typical Caribbean excursion. Instead of snorkeling over a reef or sitting on another beach, you can head into Florida's wetlands and take an airboat ride looking for alligators, birds, and other wildlife. Depending on the tour, you may be traveling into the Street, Johns River area, or other wetlands around Central Florida. Airboats can move quickly through shallow water and marsh areas, so the experience itself is part sightseeing and part thrill ride. This is a really good option for families and for anyone who wants to see a different side of Florida. If you're visiting from another part of the country or from overseas, seeing an alligator in its natural environment might be just as memorable as visiting one of Orlando's theme parks. It also gives you that Florida experience without necessarily committing your entire port day to Disney or Universal. Another option worth looking at is an eco-tour around the Indian River Lagoon and the waterways surrounding the Space Coast. Depending on what your cruise line offers, you may find kayaking, pontoon boats, dolphin watching tours, or manatee-focused wildlife excursions. This is a much quieter experience compared with Kennedy Space Center or Orlando, but it can be a fantastic choice for couples or families who enjoy nature. Florida's Space Coast has a surprising amount of wildlife, and getting onto the water gives you the opportunity to see dolphins, birds, manatees, and the coastal environment from a completely different perspective. So how would I rank all of these? For a first-time visitor, Kennedy Space Center would easily be at or near the top of my list. It's close enough to Port Canaveral to make sense during a cruise stop, and it's something you really can't duplicate anywhere else. If you're traveling with kids or teenagers who are huge Disney or Universal fans and you have a very long port day, then one of the Orlando transfers could be worth considering. For someone who wants to relax, Cocoa Beach is probably the easiest option. If you love fishing, look into a deep-sea charter. And if you want wildlife and something that feels distinctly Florida, I'd seriously consider an airboat ride or lagoon eco tour. There is one more excursion that doesn't cost you anything, and it's one that people sometimes overlook: stay on the ship. I know that sounds strange. You booked a cruise to visit different destinations. So why would you stay on board when you reach Port Canaveral? But hear me out. If you've already been to Kennedy Space Center, you've done Orlando multiple times, and Cocoa Beach isn't calling your name, Port Canaveral can actually be a fantastic day to enjoy your ship. This is especially true if you're sailing on one of these huge modern ships with water slides, multiple pools, specialty restaurants, sports activities, and other attractions that are normally packed on sea days. When thousands of people get off the ship, everything on board can suddenly feel completely different. The pool deck might be quieter. The water slides may have shorter lines. You might be able to get a better seat by the pool, walk around the ship without crowds, or actually spend time enjoying the amenities you paid for. And depending on the ship and what remains open while you're in port, this can feel like having a much more expensive cruise ship almost to yourself. That's especially worth considering because Port Canaveral isn't a destination where I'd recommend just getting off the ship with no plan. Unlike Nassau, Cozumel, or some of the more developed cruise ports, there isn't a huge passenger-focused area directly outside every terminal where you can simply wander around for a few hours. Most of the best attractions require transportation, so if none of them really interest you, don't feel like you have to spend money on an excursion just because the ship stopped there. The biggest piece of advice I can give you for Port Canaveral is to pay attention to distance and time. Kennedy Space Center and Cocoa Beach are relatively close compared with Orlando. Disney and Universal require considerably more travel. Always look at how long your ship is actually scheduled to be in port, what time you need to be back on board, and how much of your excursion is going to be spent sitting in transportation. Port Canaveral is unique because it really serves two different purposes in the cruise industry. It's one of the world's busiest home ports, sending massive ships toward the Bahamas and Caribbean every week. But it can also be a destination itself for ships sailing down the East Coast. That means your perfect Port Canaveral day might look completely different from somebody else's. For a first-time visitor, I'd go see Kennedy Space Center. For the theme park fanatic with enough time, Disney or Universal might be the answer. For anglers, head offshore and go fishing. For a relaxing day, stay closer to the port and visit Cocoa Beach. For nature lovers, check out an airboat or lagoon tour. And if you've already done all of that, stay on board, grab a chair by the pool, and enjoy having a much quieter ship for a few hours. So let me know in the comments. If Port Canaveral was one of the stops on your next cruise, would you head to Kennedy Space Center, make the trip into Orlando, spend the day at the beach, go fishing, check out some Florida wildlife, or just stay on board and enjoy the ship? And if you've already visited Port Canaveral as a port of call, let everyone know what you did and whether you thought it was worth it. If you found this video helpful, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to Adventures Away for more cruise tips, port guides, ship tours, and everything you need to make your next vacation a little easier. Thanks for watching, and as always, we'll see you on the next adventure.